on this Tuesday night, demanding justice for Jacob Blake. The outrage in Wisconsin over the police shooting of a black man.
They shoot first and then try to justify it later.
As the violence becomes a weapon in America's presidential race. The calm before the storm, where Hurricane Laura is expected to lash out. Pandemic roadmap for school buses.
The bus at the best of times is a bit of a cesspool.
Anxiety over what critics call a lack of protection. And a disorienting orientation week.
This year's going to be different for everybody.
Canadian universities learn a new way to welcome students.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Robin Gill.
They shot my son 7 times. 7 times. Like he didn't matter. But my son matters.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. You just heard the father of a 29-year-old black man who is now paralyzed after being shot in the back by police. The shooting in Wisconsin was caught on camera and has set off a wave of anger in cities across the United States. At times, it's been fiery. The unrest in the city of Kenosha, where Jacob Blake was shot Sunday evening, has destroyed or damaged dozens of businesses. Blake's mother says her son would be unpleased with violent demonstrations. She also called on protesters, police, and politicians to find unity and not resort to hate.
Do Jacob justice on this level and examine your hearts.
Yes.
We need healing.
It's been a long summer with a spotlight on racial injustice in America. And as Eric Sorensen reports, this incident sharpens the political divide as the U.S. presidential race heats up.
A second night of unrest, fires, and defiance of a curfew in the name of Jacob Blake.
Say his name!
Jacob Blake! And once more, angry protests have spread to other American cities, as they did after the death of George Floyd. In a summer of increasing awareness around the Black Lives Matter movement, another police incident has unnerved many Americans.
It makes you scared. Like, I fear for myself, I fear for my other black brothers and sisters.
The circumstances aren't fully known, but there's evidence Jacob Blake, a black man, was shot by police multiple times in the back.
My kids is in the car.
The description by Blake's fiancée is gut-wrenching.
And saw that officer grab Jacob by his t-shirt and turn his head and just as many times as he felt like it.
Blake is reportedly paralyzed from the waist down, though it's unclear if that's permanent. There have been no charges. The officers involved have been put on administrative leave. Blake's lawyer says the shooting is all too familiar.
We keep saying this after every tragedy. We can't have a justice system for black America and one for white America.
Barely 2 months before the U.S. presidential election, the protests are reigniting the battle over public perception around race and violence. Democrats are urging peaceful protest.
Black Lives Matter!
For George Floyd.
Last week at their convention, Democrats pledged to address race and justice.
We've got to do the work to fulfill that promise of equal justice under law.
This week, a very different message at the Republican National Convention.
America is not a racist country.
Rioters must not be allowed to destroy our cities.
Republicans are warning of a dark future if Joe Biden is elected, even featuring the couple who brandished weapons against Black Lives Matter protesters.
Your family will not be safe in the radical Democrats' America.
The unrest sparked by the shooting is happening on President Donald Trump's watch. Democrats say Trump has fanned the flames of racial injustice. But scenes of violence also play to a Republican message of fear in Middle America. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
There's talk among the Toronto Raptors of a potential playoff boycott in the wake of the Jacob Blake shooting. Players say they're frustrated that despite repeated calls for action, nothing seems to change.
Coming down here, making a choice to play, we're supposed to not be in vain, but it's just starting to feel like everything we're doing is just going through the motions and nothing's really changing.
I'm frustrated, honestly. I'm disappointed. I'm pretty tired, and
sick to my stomach to have to sit up here and talk about this again and continue this long fight that we've been fighting since day one, of slavery.
The Raptors are supposed to start their second round series against the Boston Celtics on Thursday. A warning today from Canada's top doctor about the rising rates of COVID-19 in young people. Teresa Tam says young Canadians can't afford to let their guard down. There have been more than 125,000 cases of COVID-19 in Canada, and more than 9,000 people have died. Tonight, there are still more than 4,800 active cases of COVID-19 across the country. Alarmingly, people under 40 make up nearly half of all new cases recorded last week, and 20 to 29-year-olds account for 25% of cases, despite making up just 14% of the population. And 30 to 39-year-olds are next, accounting for 21% of new cases last week.
The most concerning issue is that as COVID-19 continues to circulate in any age group, as it has for weeks in young adults, it builds a reservoir of the virus that can spill over, affecting others young and old.
And Quebec's premier won't force Quebecers to download the federal government's COVID-19 contact tracing app. It's designed to warn Canadians if they've come within 2 meters of another user who later tests positive for COVID-19. It's currently only being used in Ontario. The federal government wants other provinces to follow suit to ensure people traveling between provinces are notified of possible exposures. With students heading back to class, schools are switching lanes to try to limit the spread of COVID-19. But there are concerns for those in the driver's seat. They see a potential weak link in the system, the buses that carry children to school. Mike Armstrong explains.
As a bus driver, there are the problems you can see and check for. That hasn't changed. But Rob Robson's been driving a bus for a decade and says getting back behind the wheel this year has him nervous. COVID-19 isn't something you can see.
I'm 60 years old, so now technically I'm, in that high risk category. So I don't want to catch it from anybody. I don't want to give it to anybody either.
We need it to be safe.
Now, Robson isn't alone. The Toronto Bus Drivers Union says its members still don't know enough about safety protocols. It says while everyone's worried about kids in classrooms, not enough is being done to mitigate risk in buses, a place where physical distancing ranges from unlikely to impossible.
That school bus, which wouldn't have the square footage of one classroom, will carry 72 kids shoulder to shoulder.
Each province has different rules about busing, what's allowed and what isn't. What appears to be shared is concern. This was a recent protest about school safety in Alberta.
I mean, the bus at the best of times is a bit of a cesspool.
The directive from the ministry.
Some of the tightest new rules are in Quebec. The government's limiting buses to 48 students. They'll have assigned seating and masks are mandatory. There's also a new job being added to the driver's day, cleaning. Drivers with the company Transco are each being given a bag of cleaning products and PPE, and in some cases, plastic barriers are being put in. Now, that's not something allowed under Transport Canada rules in other provinces.
There's a reason why a school bus is 16 times safer than a car. That's because it's been tested over and over again to be the safest possible.
So you don't make changes to it?
No.
Now, some Quebec schools did reopen for several weeks at the end of the last school year. There was a chance to see what worked and what didn't. Transco says one of the things it found was positive. Students were aware of the virus and cooperated well with drivers. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
Canada and China held top-level talks in Rome today. Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister spoke with his Chinese counterpart about collaborating in the search for a COVID-19 vaccine. Francois-Philippe Champagne also reiterated demands that Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor be released. The two were detained after Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou was arrested in Vancouver on behalf of the American government. Erin O'Toole faced the media for the first time since becoming the Conservative Party's new leader. Let's bring in our David Akin. And David, Erin O'Toole is trying to convince Canadians that he's like no other Conservative leader before him.
Well, that's right, Robin. In fact, O'Toole said something today that neither Andrew Scheer nor Stephen Harper ever said.
I won the leadership of the Conservative Party as a pro-choice Conservative MP, one that that won with a strong mandate.
O'Toole also declared himself a defender of LGBT rights.
I am an MP with a clear track record on standing up for human rights, whether it's women, whether it's the LGBT community.
O'Toole felt compelled to make those declarations for two reasons. First, he won his party's leadership when at least 20,000 voters who had initially supported one of the two social conservatives running against him swung their support over to O'Toole on the final ballot. And he's being challenged by Liberal MPs over the continued presence in the Tory caucus of Ontario MP and leadership rival Derek Sloan. Sloan has come under fire for his crudely articulated anti-abortion views and for the way he criticized Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Theresa Tam. O'Toole also named key staff positions Tuesday, and those staffers are, like O'Toole himself, all from Eastern Canada. That's a clear sign that the locus of power in the Conservative Party has shifted for the first time in the history of the modern party from the West to the East. Now, that said, O'Toole's first phone calls were to the premiers of Alberta and Saskatchewan, and Western alienation was the very first item O'Toole brought up when he talked Monday to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
If they continue to leave out the ability for our resource sector to get Canadian resources to market, we're going to see more Western alienation. We're going to see less jobs and opportunity for Canadians in Ontario and Atlantic Canada.
O'Toole also cautioned the PM against any parliamentary funny business.
If Mr. Trudeau thinks he can play some games with a new leader and force an election, we will be ready.
Next up for O'Toole, a face-to-face meeting with Quebec's premier and the first meeting with his caucus. Robin.
David Akin in Ottawa. Thanks, David. In the U.S., the first night of the Republican convention painted a rosy picture of the country's future if Donald Trump is re-elected. As Jackson Proskow reports, that could spell trouble for other Republicans on November's ballot.
On a night filled with unquestioning praise for Donald Trump,
Trump is the bodyguard of Western civilization.
There were rosy promises of better days.
We must fight to save America now, or we may lose her forever.
And dire claims about the end of days if Joe Biden is elected.
They want to enslave you to the weak, dependent, liberal, victim ideology to the point that you will not recognize this country or yourself.
As Republicans rally around the president, they've ignored the more than 175,000 lives lost to the COVID-19 pandemic and made no mention of the millions of Americans who are now unemployed, all on Trump's watch.
I do think that the devotion you hear from Republican office holders toward Trump, it's unusually fulsome praise for the president.
Instead, the party has gone all in, insisting a silent majority is on their side. It's a perilous strategy. Trump's personal approval rating sits at just 42%, while only 13% of Americans are satisfied with the way things are going in their country.
It's pretty risky given that the president is behind right now. And if the president goes down to defeat, he could drag down a lot of members of his own party with him.
It's clear Trump isn't interested in winning over new voters. He simply wants to keep his base agitated. He'll need them to vote and to back him if he contests the election results.
The only way they can take this election away from us is if this is a rigged election.
The convention has made it clear this is Trump's show. Republicans are simply part of it. Political speeches from the White House grounds will further blur the lines between politics and governance this week, while Trump will feature prominently every single night. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
As one storm vanishes, another is on the horizon. Coming up, the hurricane hurtling toward the U.S. Gulf Coast. Marco came ashore as a weak tropical storm, but now people living along the U.S. Gulf Coast are preparing for Hurricane Laura. That storm is expected to hit later this week. Laura has already drenched Cuba and the island of Hispaniola, where at least 23 people died as a result of heavy flooding and landslides. Global News meteorologist Ross Hull is tracking Laura as it moves into the Gulf of Mexico, and that's where it's expected to strengthen. Ross?
Robin, Laura is expected to become the first major hurricane of the Atlantic hurricane season so far. Why? The right ingredients are in place. The warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, bathtub temperature in many areas over 30 degrees, and something called vertical wind shear. There isn't a lot of it from top to bottom in the atmosphere, which will allow this system to intensify. As we take a look at the satellite image, the storm isn't as ragged as it was earlier on, about 24 hours ago even. It's starting to take on more of a defined shape. That eye wall feature is also starting to develop, and that's the sign of a healthy storm. In terms of the track, well, as it moves across the Gulf of Mexico, absorbing that warm water late Wednesday into Thursday, likely reaching major hurricane status, southeastern portions of Texas stretching east towards the mouth of the Mississippi River, all in line for very strong winds, storm surge, and also heavy rain. So this is certainly a storm to watch. It will likely get absorbed into the westerlies, the remnants of the storm, and could provide some rain for eastern Canada by the weekend. We'll keep an eye on this one. Robin.
All right, thanks for that, Ross. Still ahead, did a Canadian company's fall give rise to a Chinese tech giant? Before Chinese company Huawei became the largest telecommunications equipment manufacturer in the world, a Canadian company, Nortel, was on top, with 70% of all internet traffic running on Canadian technology. Tonight, Global News has deeper insight into what led to the collapse of Nortel and how China may have been involved. A former Nortel security advisor claims the Chinese government was behind a systemic hack at Nortel that began in 2004 and went on for a decade.
You know, they were still on our network, they were still stealing, and they got away with it. This was like precision work, like a military unit, for goodness sake. These guys were highly trained, and they beat our best people that we had and our best tools and systems that we had. And they totally took us down. They had access to everything.
Brian Shields believes the Chinese government used information from Nortel to facilitate the rise of Huawei. Nortel's fall centered around an accounting scandal. Some top executives were charged, but were later acquitted. But it happened as Huawei gained market dominance, and Shields says that's more than a coincidence. Huawei and the Chinese government deny stealing Nortel's property. Let's bring in global investigative reporter Sam Cooper now, who's been digging into all of this. And Sam, Brian Shields says he's disappointed Ottawa didn't step in to protect Nortel. What does he think the government should have done?
That's right. Shields and others say China focused all its cyber war power against Nortel because Nortel's innovation secrets were so key to China's telecommunications future. And the RCMP did investigate the Nortel hacking complaint in 2004, but experts told us the RCMP did not then and still does not have the jurisdiction or the resources to fight state-sponsored cybercrime against Canada's industries. And furthermore, Canada doesn't have tough foreign interference laws like Australia or other countries that can fight back against China's very broad espionage and interference networks.
So what are some of these broad interference techniques that China uses?
Sources told us in the Nortel case and generally, there's a really shocking convergence between Chinese intelligence and Chinese organized crime that's involved in stealing Canadian intellectual property and even attempts to influence Canadian political and business leaders. So, for example, sources say organized crime cyber hackers in China will be given immunity if they provide valuable property such as COVID-19 vaccine research or Nortel's secrets to Chinese intelligence. Another example could be that gangsters connected to real estate development in Canada could be facilitating visits to China between Canadian leaders and Chinese leaders. China did not respond to any of our detailed questions in this story.
Sam Cooper in Ottawa. Thanks, Sam. And you can have a longer read of Sam's deep dive into the Nortel hack on our website, globalnews.ca/Global National. Up next, Campus Conundrum. How do you welcome first-year students with no festivities? The first cohort to graduate from high school during this pandemic is now seeing another rite of passage blocked. Frosh, orientation, week of welcome. No matter the name, the first-year experience has gone virtual for post-secondary students in Canada. Jordan Armstrong looks at how campuses are transitioning to keep up tradition.
Frosh Week is the introduction to university life for first-year students. There's a lot of partying, drinking, bonding, and at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, a lot of body paint.
Just getting ready for the frosh to come in.
At least there used to be. This year, Canadian campuses are nearly deserted. And like everything else, Frosh Week will have a different feel.
Rather than just kind of copy and paste in our events from in-person to an online setting, we wanted to be mindful of the different, platforms and technology we have available to us and really mold our events around that to engage students as much as possible.
At Ryerson University in Toronto, Orientation Week leaders have tried to create virtual events, which are also interactive, and that includes the campus tour.
The Student Campus Center has you covered.
We're hosting some smaller kind of interview type concerts with some local GTA artists, so really give the students the opportunity to interact and engage with artists who they might not be able to in a traditional year where they're just at a concert.
At the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, they're still working out the details on how Frosh Week will look.
This year's going to be different for everybody. It's different for our faculty, it's different for our students, and it's different for our staff.
With a majority of UBC classes moved online, it's expected university dorms will be quieter than normal. Still, campus security will be ready to deal with scofflaw partiers who flout physical distancing. Perhaps a sign of the changing times, there are still plenty of those little red beer cups left on the grocery store shelf. Jordan Armstrong, Global News, Vancouver.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight, your Canada is this flock of birds flying over Conception Bay North in Newfoundland and Labrador. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you back here tomorrow. Have a great night.